So I'll start by acknowledging the Tangerang people of the Kulin Nation, who were the traditional custodians of the land where I'm sitting, and indeed extend that to the traditional custodians of the lands where you all are sitting, and their elders, past, present, and emerging. So I'm going to start by saying that, drawing two things together if I can, to me, researchers ask questions and solve problems. Just trying to move the zoom out of the way of my slides. And I also want to say that successful, what I'm going to currently refer to as value innovation, is about finding new solutions to problems which also bring value. And I'm not necessarily just talking about dollars there. I think value comes in many different ways, and people have to perceive value for it to be value innovation. And I'm looking really rather, don't particularly like the word commercialization. I tend to avoid it, but I do see it all as research translation. And to me, it's about bridging the gap between knowledge and action. The action is do, and it takes many, many different forms. I think this slide kind of captures that well, because we have the knowledge, we have the research. It's much more than patents. It's the how to do research. It's the how to think and how to solve problems. So I'm going to talk a little bit more widely about something and a strategy that isn't new, that may be familiar to some of you, but not to others, which is what has been known as red ocean and blue ocean strategy. The book that was written about that's actually quite old, just checking the author's title, which was by authors Chan Kim and Renee Bourgoin, I don't know how to pronounce it. And really, I have spent most of my life playing in the blue ocean. And the reason I've put this up is because I think I've encountered commercialization strategy discussions where someone will say, now what industry category is that in and how would we describe it? And you know, where do we play and where do we fit and what are the numbers? And there is another approach, which is to play outside that ocean and make it irrelevant. So, and I think university research, if we're solving problems, is very, very well suited to that approach. And the best known example, and the one that's quoted in that book, long way from your research, is actually Cirque du Soleil. And I decided to stick with that example as a first one because it's so easy to understand. Cirque du Soleil entered into their particular business model and method of entertainment at a time when circuses were going backwards, struggling to make money, struggling to get audiences, and they made more money in their first year than Barnum had made in the previous 100 years. And they did all sorts of technical things that were very logical, but most of all, they were playing in a new market. They were taking people, not traditional circus goers, they were really taking theatre goers or anyone interested in entertainment. I thought I'd bring one a little bit nearer to home, and that's Graham Clark and the cochlear implant. There was no incumbent, there was no industry there, it was a new market. It was enormously high value, not just in the dollars, but high value for the patient. Quite frankly, a much easier path for Graham Clark would have been to license IP to 3M, and I will disclose a little known secret there, which is that 3M paid my fare to Australia to introduce their implants here, and I had no idea at the time, coming from the UK, that that was rather a silly idea. I realised the error of my ways pretty soon after arrival. But Graham Clark saw his research translated. He helped many thousands of people. He remained an academic, but he also remained involved. And that's going to be an underlying thread in the next few minutes as well. Because I've certainly met people who think that commercializing something, using that word, or starting a business, moving over to, or getting your IP, your intellectual property, your research outcome, your solution into the market means going to work in a company. It actually doesn't. It can do, and I have to say personally, I think it's a very exciting thing to do. I've really enjoyed that jump. Graham didn't, and he played that card immensely to advantage with a very long profitable and fruitful relationship with Cochlear, maintaining his research group. The other chap in the photo is a chap he's died a few years ago, but he's a namesake but not a relative, Rod Saunders, who I think probably needs as big a medal as Graham for offering himself up to early stage research, and he put in hours and hours pretty much for the rest of his life. So I think we have an obligation to maximize value, and as I put it in inverted commas so we don't just think dollars, and contribute to our sovereign capability. That's of course a very topical thing to say. The answer doesn't lie in analysing business in a traditional industrial age manner, so think blue ocean. It's in solving problems and providing solutions. And I guess that's what I spent my life doing, initially in some big organisations and then with my own companies. And I want to quote a sentence from Larry Marshall in it. He said, "We shouldn't be treating research outcomes like coal, digging it up and selling it overseas." Oh, that was a terrific statement. So I invite other people to borrow it as well as I have. So it's really about that building value. So forgive me if some of this is incredibly sort of basic to such a sophisticated audience, but I think that it's really, really important that in research and in problem solving, we really understand our purpose. My purpose was triggered in the interest in hearing by my dad, who lost his hearing in his early 20s. I must admit I was a profoundly unsympathetic child. I just thought he was a bit odd. But as I got older, I realised that this was a field where I wanted to reduce the problems. I really didn't know how or what to do. And on my father's advice, I went off to get a science degree, which, given that I was really, really interested in hearing, I went and studied quantum physics, which makes lots of sense, but which I have no regrets about at all. But you have to know what your purpose is. So mine has been hearing through my career in many different guises, but also what problem are you solving? So I knew that I was trying to solve greater access to sound, if you like, hearing equality for more people. I really didn't know how to do it. I had a little go between school and university as being a teaching assistant. I was an absolute disaster. An experience not to be repeated. And again, it was my father saying, "I'll just go to university and study a science or an engineering and you'll be all right." And then it's your solution, and then it's easy really, it's the do. You've got your solution, you then have to do something, well I think you have to do something with that solution. And I said be involved. And I actually think that for those of us in research, it is, we may not own the IP, but it is our solution. And I think we need to take responsibility to go with it and see that it's used well. That may not be starting companies, it may not be selling products, it may be just in making sure that one's research is out in the big wide world in an easy to understand format. And for those of you who know Science in Public, I was very interested in the article they published recently that said, you know, if your work is out there in the papers, in the PR, in the media, it actually enhances your career as a scientist. So I think be involved, like Graham Clark, be involved. So value innovation takes many forms. And I've been working in a field that I believe has been incredibly ready for change, and it's taken COVID to persuade a lot of people that's true. But I think it's important to look at things in a very different way. And I know all of you do, and that's why you're such successful researchers. And I put in this sentence, we can't succeed in innovation in healthcare if we base our work on the methods that have caused the problems in the first place. To me, problem solving is back to basics, not just looking at the industry norms. And that's a challenge in healthcare because the whole structure of it is either evidence-based or doing it like Professor someone in, you know, famous hospital somewhere has done it always, which you can pretty much take back to the time of Hippocrates, which, given that was about 400 BC, is ripe for change. So what we need to do is is really identify, well, what are the problems? What is the problem that we're solving? So I didn't look at problems in the hearing aid industry or as such. I looked at what is the problem? People are not getting hearing aids. They don't have access to hearing aids. How do I solve that? So with Peter Blamey, we founded a company solving some problems, quite a lot of problems, and providing a lot of value innovation, which I'm happy to say did translate into dollars in the end, but it is also brought a lot of import dollars between the two companies we ran into Australia, which I'm particularly pleased with, and it created a lot of jobs. But most of all, it helped a lot of people here. And I again stolen from the Blue Ocean strategy, what they call a strategy analysis or strategy canvas. I reconstructed that well after the event of starting Blamey Saunders, because I think all of this was pretty much in my head, but I'll just take you through it. So if we look at the industries that we would have been competing in, one might say, well, is it the hearing aid industry, which is this green and yellow line, or is it the hearing amplifier industry, which is like hearing aids but have no regulatory requirement. They're not TGA approved. You can just make one and sell one. So an example there would be the very successful West Australian company, Nuheara. We didn't play in either of those oceans, but I looked at the lower axis, looks at price and value, self-programming, which to me is about empowerment, people working at home, and support, remote support for hearing aids, which the industry is just beginning to think, oh, maybe that'd be a good idea because it'd be quite handy in COVID. Well, we've been doing it for 10 years. So if we look at how those shape up, hearing amplifiers are low price. Ours were moderate price. Hearing aids are extremely high price. If we look at value, hearing aids in the traditional market are, quite frankly, not great value. They could be a lot cheaper. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Whereas Blamey Saunders, it was extremely good value. We kept prices moderate, but the features of the hearing aids were very high. I know there is at least one listener who would have liked to see another feature there, which we didn't have, but I believe they do now. Self-programming was an absolute anathema to the hearing aid industry, and there are papers and papers saying, you know, this is probably not possible. There's also research saying, well, yes, there is, and customers really like it, and they weren't all our papers. And remote support. Again, Blamey Saunders took that on very, very strongly, developed training programs, developed strategies, developed the tools, but neither traditional hearing aids nor hearing amplifiers would do that. And the fact is, if you're not getting your hearing aid to work, you don't want to use it. So I want to show you how the model worked in Blamey Saunders, because it was quite different to anything else that was out there. It's still running now. The reason the company was sold was because we weren't really thinking of selling it. As it happens, because of COVID, I'm very happy not to own the company. But we were approached, in fact, by a very big player in the consumer sector, not the hearing aid sector, which I think frightened the hearing aid market. So it didn't go to the consumer purchaser, it went into the hearing aid market, who found themselves, when COVID turned up, with a very useful tool. And I believe that Blamey Saunders is handling all of their sales from that big player in Australia at the moment. But what we had was have the would-be client, or anyone that's free, test their hearing online, but using speech, not using beeps, using speech and giving results that said, these are the sounds you hear well, these are the sounds you don't hear well. We had unique processing in the hearing aid that made it very easy to fix. But from this test, we could predict some initial settings so that people started in the right ballpark, then they got it, and using the programmer, they then personalized it at home. We deliberately kept that wired at that point because we wanted people to program them, then get on with using them and not constantly tweak them. This was all unique IP. This was unique software, and then we had a unique business model in that we trained staff, and on the whole, we didn't take traditional audiologists. I was very keen that we didn't have to unteach bad habits for really, really good service support. Pretty much wasn't 24/7, but it was certainly same day. All the data from every step of the way was stored in is stored in a central database. And that meant that we could not only improve our product, but we could also help anybody at any time. So if someone had rang up and they'd gone on holiday in the US and had forgotten their hearing aids and they were going to be there for a prolonged period, we could send them something that was ready set up. So, and we could monitor with that too, which has tremendous advantage in looking at things like potentially medically serious change in hearing loss. So we provided a solution that expanded the market. We went to people who weren't using hearing aids. And in fact, the time taken for people to get hearing aids with us from first noticing hearing loss was about 7 months in an industry where it's about 10 years. So I was aware of the, I want to keep to time. So again, and I certainly don't want to sound patronising, I think that researchers do provide value and need to provide value, and we need to share knowledge and translate those research outcomes in a way that brings the world along with us and which really solves real world problems and where we keep involved in that solution. And I'll just give a tiny anecdote on that one in my last minute, which was that as a naive CEO of our first company, which was called Dynamic Hearing, we sold signal processing to a French company based in Paris, who were incredibly keen to do everything right and implement things well. They made a terrible stuff up of implementing our software. And when I said to them, well, we've given you all this guidance in these agreements and so on and so on, they looked at me and they said, so many words. So I think we need to remain involved and help them. And that means it's very satisfying. I can absolutely guarantee it is really satisfying. So my last slide is just that I think we need to have clarities about our purpose and problems and stick with it. So clarity affords focus. So again, I hope I haven't preached to the converted. I'm very aware of the audience, but that's kind of my final message, and I hope you enjoyed those thoughts.
Thank you so much, Elaine. Does anyone have a question? If you would like to raise your virtual hand, I'll be able to pass over to you. Yes, Paul, would you like to?
Yeah, Elaine, I'm just curious about your exposure to the medical profession here in Australia. I've just found it extremely frustrating to penetrate new technology into that marketplace. I'm seeing it also now in the COVID situation. So I was curious about your experience.
You're absolutely right. And I think I would probably say they're sitting right in the middle of the red ocean. I actually got challenged at once by an audiologist, rather bizarrely, since she was actually seeking a job with me. And she said, Elaine, what's it like to be the most hated audiologist in Australia? And I said, you know, I don't mind at all if I am, because I have thousands and thousands of people with hearing problems who are really happy. So I think, I don't think the medical profession will change quickly, but what's happening is that patients in many, many areas, it's not just hearing, are more and more and more empowered. And I don't think the change will come directly from the medical profession. Telehealth's a good example of that. They have been resisting it for years, and come COVID, it was a stroke of the pen.
Thank you. Marilyn, I believe you had a question. And apologies, you're on mute, Marilyn.
So Elaine, I really loved the presentation. Thank you. And I liked the emphasis on focus and sticking with it when you're the scientist, because that helps us with our company. However, our shareholders are saying to us that they'd feel happier if we had more than one product that we were working on. So how do you stay focused and keep your investors happy when they would like to see a bigger portfolio?
We actually resisted money because of people who wanted a bigger portfolio. Literally had people coming and saying, look, we could put in lots of money and can you please put sensors in your hearing aids? And we felt that was not what we were good at. So it's a challenge. I'm very intrigued they're saying that, actually, because people usually want focus. They must, if they're shareholders, they're directors as well.
Oh, a mixture of both, actually. I think they would like to think that just say our product was successful and we could sell it, that the company could come along with a second product. Of course, we don't have anything as complicated as a hearing aid, which I think you would need total focus on. But
well, we were in the situation where we had a product plan which was always developing, and I didn't go into the hearing aid that we designed and developed, which Bronwyn referred to at the beginning, but that was a big step forward. So we, if you like, went deeper into solving more and more issues, and that we developed a new hearing aid because we wanted it to be easier to handle and we wanted it to be beautiful. So we were able to go deeper and deeper. So what is your product? Forgive me, I should know, I'm sure.
oh, no, you don't need to know. No, well, we're interested in the pharmaceutical industry and developing drugs for treatment of certain conditions. And I think that some of our investors would like to see whether our drugs could be used to treat a wider range of conditions rather than the one that we're focusing on.
Well, perhaps it would keep them happy if you were able to draw out a timeline. You might probably have done this over the next 3 to 5 years. I mean, developing new products in any industry costs money, so there's a whole cash flow implication. In my experience, it's like building a house. It costs twice as much money as you expect and takes twice as long. But, you know, perhaps they'd be happy if there was a plan where the product portfolio could get either deeper or widen its applications. A certain amount of criticism was levelled at Cochlear probably about 20 years ago, because they only had one product and no COVID, but they ran into some supply issues. And there was a lot of criticism about this silly company having a single product. I don't think anyone's saying that now. So I would have a strategy. It sounds like a strategy for managing directors and shareholders.
Indeed, yes. Always better communication.
Thank you. I believe we have time for one final question for Elaine. Alexander.
Elaine, lovely to see you. Elaine, people are saying that COVID is sometimes kicking us along a path that was eventually going to happen anyway. Taking your product, and I know it's not your company anymore, but my guess is that COVID is accelerating the advantage that your product has over the incumbents. Would that be right?
It absolutely has. People are now jumping into telehealth. People are approaching me and saying, you know, how do you do it? Can we do it? But they're still, to me, making the same mistake of trying to do things the same old way, but via the phone or via Zoom, which is why I raise that point of solving a problem and starting with the problem, not with, you know, iterating it. It's a bit like turning out CDs and saying they sound so much better because they're digital, as early digital hearing aids were celebrated as being better because they were digital, and of course they weren't. So it is accelerating it, and from a business perspective, it's quite interesting in that the company that bought us, Sonova, has a chain of hearing aid companies, distribution in Australia called Connect Hearing, and the original plan was that Blamey Saunders would be completely separate, but in the end, Blamey Saunders has ended up handling all the remote work for Connect. So it's actually kind of increased in stature under acquisition. However, the hearing aid market sales are down because nobody's out and about meeting and talking, so they don't know they have problems. So frankly, I'm glad I don't own it.
That's a very good point. Oh, I believe, Peter Laver, you have one final question.
Yes, Elaine, that was fascinating. One of the interesting things for me, I come from an entirely different industry, but when is the time that a researcher needs to let go? It's a bit like parenting. Sometimes you've got to let your invention disappear and hand it over to people who are actually going to produce something from it. And it's a pretty hard judgment. It sounds like in your industry, it might be a little easier to hang on in there until commercialisation is well underway. In the manufacturing and mining area that I've come from, if you build a pilot plant, the researchers become a bloody nuisance pretty quickly because they always want to do things that are impractical or expensive or want to tweak things. You want to get on and actually try and produce something. It's quite an interesting judgment as to when you tell the researchers to go away and do something else.
I think it's a very interesting question, actually. It's something I asked myself a lot over the years. And in my last year at the company before we sold it, I actually put in a different CEO because I was afraid that the clinician researcher in me was actually potentially holding things back down certain lines. Where Graham successful was that on the whole, and Cochlear had separate ways, but he kind of had a quiet influence in that he, for example, was the final arbiter on things like safety of new devices, and it was very much a two-way relationship in the Cochlear could say, oh look, Graham Clark and the University of Melbourne say that this is safe, and he didn't compromise on his criteria at all. So I think at the end it comes down to your judgment and the relationship that you can build. Investors very quickly say, oh look, as scientists, you know, you don't really know anything about business. But I have successfully argued many times that as scientists, it's how we communicate, because as scientists, we ask questions, we collect and analyze data, and we find solutions and answers. And I think if we use that in the right way, and build the relationship correctly, we can be massively useful in whatever industry. I think I've come to the conclusion that most industries are similar anyway. So I would say it's about the relationship and your own judgment.
We might have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Elaine. It was really wonderful to learn a little bit more about your personal motivations for your research and technology development. It was really fascinating. Thank you.